I still remember the exact words Isabella hurled at me that day. "Why are you here? I made it clear. You're not welcome." She said it in front of everyone, her voice sharp and cold, echoing across the hall. Those words weren't just meant to keep me out of her wedding. They were meant to humiliate me, to make me small. And she wanted my son, Daniel, to see it. My name is James Rook, and I never thought I'd be treated like a stranger at my own son's wedding. I wasn't there to ruin his day. I wasn't there to start a scene. I was there because I had invested not just money, but heart into seeing him start a new life. And yet, as I stood in that room, surrounded by flowers and polished silver, I could feel the judgment in every glance. Guests shifted in their seats. Some whispered. Others stared. And at the center of it all, Isabella, smiling like she had already won. But what she didn't understand about me is simple. I've lived long enough to know that silence is often stronger than shouting. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lash out. I just stood there, calm, steady. On the surface, it might have looked like she had cornered me, like I was powerless in the face of her arrogance. But inside, I knew something she didn't. I hadn't come alone. You see, Isabella's words weren't the first time I'd felt the sting of her contempt. For months leading up to this day, I noticed small cracks in the story she told about herself. Once, while filling out a catering form, she signed a different last name. Another time, during a casual dinner, she slipped up about living in a city she had supposedly never visited. They were fleeting moments, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. But I was. I didn't dig like a paranoid man. I simply paid attention. That's what years of hard work and hard lessons teach you. Listen closely, watch carefully, and the truth reveals itself in pieces. I knew something about her wasn't right. And when Daniel told me I was overthinking, when he accused me of being too protective, that cut deeper than Isabella's insults ever could. She wasn't just marrying into my family. She was driving a wedge straight between father and son. That was when I made a decision. Not to fight her openly, not to argue or confront her in front of Daniel, but to wait, to be patient, to gather proof. If Isabella was hiding something, I needed to know. And the more I followed those small clues, the more I realized the woman my son thought he loved was not the woman she claimed to be. I didn't do this alone. A friend of mine, someone I trusted for years, a retired investigator, helped me trace the pieces of her past. And what we found confirmed every instinct I had. Isabella had been married before. She had left a trail of broken trust and shattered lives behind her. But there was one man, above all, who knew exactly what kind of person she really was. That man was sitting quietly in the back of the wedding hall, waiting for the right moment. He wasn't there for revenge. He wasn't there to cause chaos. He was there because he had once believed in Isabella just like my son did now, and he had paid the price for it. And while she stood at the altar, sneering at me in front of hundreds of witnesses, she didn't know the storm that was about to walk right through her perfect little day. Because I hadn't come alone. Long before that wedding day, I had already begun to notice the cracks. They were subtle at first, so small that most men would have brushed them off. But I've lived long enough to know that the smallest lie is often the seed of something much bigger. And Isabella, as polished as she looked, could never quite keep her story straight. The first time I caught it, we were going over the guest list for the reception. She had a clipboard in her hand, flipping through the pages with that false confidence of hers. She signed her name at the bottom of a form, and I noticed it wasn't the name she introduced herself with. One letter different in the last name. She tried to cover it with a laugh when I pointed it out, saying it was just a mistake, but her eyes betrayed her. They froze for a fraction of a second, like a deer caught in headlights. Later, at a family dinner, The conversation drifted to old neighborhoods, childhood memories, the usual stories people share when trying to bond. Isabella mentioned living near a park in Seattle. Daniel, smiling proudly, said, "That's funny. You told me you'd never been to Washington before." For a split second, her fork clattered against her plate. She laughed it off again, spinning a story about visiting a cousin she'd forgotten to mention. Everyone else let it pass. I didn't. The more I listened, the more I noticed how carefully she picked her words. She avoided details about her past the way a thief avoids a spotlight. And Daniel, he was too in love to see it. That was the hardest part. My son, a man I raised to trust his instincts, had blinded himself with hers. When I tried to talk to him about my concerns, he brushed me off. "Dad, you're being paranoid," he told me, his voice sharp, defensive. "You just don't like her because she's not like Mom." That stung more than I can describe. It wasn't about his mother, it wasn't about me, it was about protecting him. But Isabella had already done her work. She had planted the idea that I was controlling, that I was jealous, that I couldn't let go of my son. She wanted him to doubt me, and it worked. Still, I couldn't let it go. Something in my gut screamed that she wasn't who she claimed to be. So I did what I knew best. I paid attention. I started collecting the little slips, the inconsistencies, the contradictions. I kept them to myself, waiting for the day when I would have enough to see the full picture. And then it happened. One evening, as I was reviewing the contracts with the venue manager, I noticed her signature again. Only this time, it wasn't just a misplaced letter. It was a completely different last name. My hands froze on the paper. I asked the manager if she had signed it herself, and he nodded. That was the moment I realized Isabella wasn't careless. She was hiding something. Something big. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying every little moment, every lie she had brushed off. I knew I couldn't confront her directly, not without proof. And I couldn't risk alienating Daniel further. I needed to be sure. I needed answers. That was when I reached out to an old friend, a man I trusted with my life, a retired investigator who had once helped me through a difficult time. I handed him the documents, the names, the details. I told him, "Something doesn't add up. Find out what she's hiding." Weeks later, when he came back with the truth, I could hardly believe it. The woman preparing to marry my son wasn't just a liar. She was something far worse. And when I finally discovered who she really was, I couldn't believe my son had fallen into her trap. When the truth about Isabella's past first reached me, it felt like the ground shifted under my feet. My investigator friend had done his job well. He traced her old records, confirmed the different last name, and even found whispers of a marriage she'd buried deep. That was the moment I knew Isabella wasn't just hiding small secrets, she was hiding an entire life. But as much as I wanted to sit Daniel down and explain everything, I knew I had to be careful. He wasn't the boy I raised anymore. He was a man blinded by love, chained by loyalty to a woman who had built her world on lies. When I finally tried to speak to him, it didn't go the way I hoped. It was late one evening. Daniel came to the house, still in his work clothes, looking tired but determined. I could tell by the way he avoided my eyes that Isabella had already poisoned him against me. "Dad," he said, his tone sharp, "you need to stop." "Stop what?" I asked, though I already knew where this was headed. "Digging into Isabella, questioning her past, talking to people behind her back. She told me you've been interfering, trying to control us." Her words cut deeper than any blade. I leaned back in my chair, steady, trying not to let the sting show on my face. "Daniel, listen to me. I'm not trying to control you. I just want you to be safe. There are things about her that don't add up, things you don't see because you're too close." He shook his head. "No, Dad. What doesn't add up is why you can't just be happy for me. Why you're determined to ruin the one good thing in my life. You've always wanted control, and now you can't stand that I'm building a future without you pulling the strings." Those words, they didn't sound like my son. They sounded like her. I could almost hear Isabella's voice in every accusation he threw at me. She had done it. She had planted doubt in him, turned my own child into her shield. "Daniel," I said quietly, trying to reach him, "do you think I'd go this far if it wasn't serious? Do you think I'd risk losing you if I didn't have a reason? You know me. You know I wouldn't lie to you." He finally looked up at me, his jaw tight, his eyes clouded with anger and confusion. "All I know is that you don't trust her. And if you can't trust the woman I'm going to marry, then maybe you don't trust me either." Silence filled the room. My heart sank. This was exactly what Isabella wanted, to drive a wedge so deep between us that nothing could pull us back together. I wanted to tell him everything then and there, about the documents, the false name, the marriage she'd hidden, about the man who had already suffered for believing her lies. But I stopped myself. If I pushed too hard, I'd lose him completely. I had to be patient. I had to let the truth reveal itself in front of him, where he couldn't deny it. Daniel stood, shaking his head. "Just stop, Dad. If you keep this up, you won't just lose her, you'll lose me." I watched him leave that night, shoulders stiff, his back turned against me. For the first time in my life, I felt powerless, not because of Isabella, but because my son couldn't see the truth staring him in the face. And as I sat there in the quiet, I realized something that broke me more than anything else. I looked into my son's eyes and realized he no longer trusted me. After that night with Daniel, I sat in the quiet of my living room long after he left. His words replayed in my head over and over. "If you keep this up, you'll lose me." I could accept many things in life, but losing my son to a lie wasn't one of them. Isabella thought she had won, that she had built an iron wall between father and son. But what she didn't know was that her wall had cracks, and I was ready to push until it crumbled. I knew I couldn't convince Daniel with words. He had already chosen her version of the truth over mine. If I wanted to save him, I needed something undeniable, something that no amount of charm or manipulation could erase. That's when I remembered the different last name on the venue contract, the false identity, the trail she thought no one would ever follow. With the help of my old friend, the retired investigator, we dug deeper. Records, public files, hidden traces she had left behind. And there it was, clear as day. Isabella had been married before. Her husband's name was Robert Kane. The papers showed it ended badly, but the records didn't tell the whole story. I needed to hear it from the man himself. Finding him wasn't easy, but my friend had connections, and eventually we tracked him down. Robert Kane lived 2 states away in a modest apartment complex that looked nothing like the life Isabella flaunted. When I first saw him, he looked worn, like a man who had carried too much on his back for too long. His shoulders were heavy, his eyes dim, but there was a sharpness there, like embers that hadn't gone out. We sat down at a small diner near his place. I introduced myself, told him who I was and why I had come.
He listened in silence, stirring the coffee in his cup without taking a sip. When I finally mentioned Isabella's name, I saw his jaw tighten. His hand gripped the spoon until his knuckles turned white. "She's getting married again?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Yes," I said, "to my son." He closed his eyes for a long moment, shaking his head slowly. "That woman, she ruined me. She bled me dry, took everything I had, and left me holding the blame for her schemes. My business collapsed. My reputation was dragged through the mud. People thought I was the crook, but it was her. Always her." There was bitterness in his tone, but beneath it, I heard something else. The raw ache of a man who had once believed, once trusted, once loved. He had been in Daniel's shoes before, and he had paid the price for it. "I know she'll destroy him too," I said quietly, "unless we stop her." For a long moment he stared at me, weighing my words. I half expected him to laugh, to tell me he wanted nothing to do with it. But instead, he leaned forward, his voice firm. "I don't care about revenge. I don't want her back in my life. But if I can stop her from doing to another man what she did to me, then maybe I'll finally sleep at night. Tell me where and when." In that moment, I saw it clearly. Robert Kane wasn't just a man from Isabella's past. He was the living proof of the danger she posed. And if he stood in front of my son, if he spoke the truth with his own mouth, there would be no denying it. I shook his hand across that diner table, and for the first time in months, I felt hope stir inside me. The kind of hope that comes when you know the tide is about to turn. And when he agreed, I knew the wedding would never end the way she planned.
The day of the wedding arrived, and with it, the storm. The hall was decorated with flowers, so carefully placed you could almost smell the money dripping off every petal. The chandeliers glistened, the polished floors shone, and every guest was dressed as if they had stepped out of a magazine. On the surface, it was perfection. But beneath it, I could feel the tension clawing at the air, thick enough to choke on. I knew the moment I walked in that I wasn't welcome. Heads turned, whispers spread like wildfire, and all eyes darted toward me as if I were the uninvited ghost at their feast. Some guests looked at me with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with judgment. And at the center of it all stood Isabella, her smile sharp as glass, her voice raised so that no one could miss it. "Why are you here?" she spat, her words echoing off the high ceilings. "You were told you're not welcome." It was the second time I'd heard those words from her lips, but this time she made sure the entire world knew it. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and I could see the flicker of embarrassment cross my son's face. Daniel's eyes darted between us, torn, confused, but too proud or too blind to step in. I didn't answer her anger with more anger. That would have been too easy, and it would have given her exactly what she wanted, proof that I was the problem. Instead, I stood still, my posture steady, my voice calm. "I'm not here to fight," I said evenly, my words carrying across the room. "And I don't intend to ruin your special day." My calmness unnerved her more than any argument could have. She expected me to lash out, to storm away, to give the guests the spectacle she was so eager to create. But I wouldn't. I'd spent too many years building my reputation on patience and restraint. Today would be no different. Around me, I heard the whispers grow. People leaned toward each other, their curiosity buzzing in the air. They wanted drama, and Isabella had almost given it to them. But what they were about to get was something far greater.
I let the silence linger, watching her shift uncomfortably under the weight of it, and then slowly I raised my hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady, almost too calm for the chaos it carried. "I won't take much of your time, but before this ceremony goes any further, there is someone here who deserves to be acknowledged, someone you all deserve to meet." Every head turned, every breath seemed to pause, the room holding itself still. Isabella's confident smile faltered for just a second, her eyes narrowing as she tried to read what was coming. She thought she had control, but the ground beneath her was already shifting. I kept my gaze fixed on her, and in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about saving my son from a mistake. It was about exposing the truth she had spent years burying. And with those words hanging in the air, I prepared to shatter her perfect little world. I raised my hand and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, there is someone here you all deserve to meet."
The silence after my words was deafening. Dozens of eyes watched me, their curiosity thickening into unease. You could feel it in the way the guests shifted in their seats, the way their whispers died on their lips. Everyone was waiting to see who would step forward, who could possibly matter so much on this perfect day. The doors of the back of the hall opened, the creak of the hinges echoing louder than it should have. And there he was, Robert Kane. He wasn't dressed like the others. No tailored suit, no polished shoes, just a modest jacket, a tie knotted a little too loosely, and a face that carried the weight of years gone wrong. His shoulders were straight, but his eyes told the story of a man who had once been broken, but not defeated. As he walked down the aisle, the guests craned their necks, whispers rising again, louder this time, sharper, like sparks catching flame. Some recognized him immediately. Others leaned toward their neighbors, trying to place the face. But I kept my eyes on Isabella. The moment she saw him, the blood drained from her face. Her confident smile collapsed. For the first time since I'd known her, she was stripped bare. Not by words, not by accusations, but by the presence of a man she had hoped never to see again. "Robert," she whispered. Barely audible, but I caught it. Her hands clutching at the bouquet as if it could shield her from the past, crashing into her present. Robert stopped a few feet from the altar, his eyes fixed on her. He didn't need to say a word. His very presence was enough to unravel her composure. The room had turned against her without a single accusation spoken. Gasps rippled across the crowd. One guest whispered, "That's him, isn't it?" Another leaned forward, murmuring, "She was married before." The air was electric, heavy with disbelief and curiosity, the perfect storm Isabella could no longer control. Daniel looked from Robert to Isabella, confusion etched across his face. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice rising with desperation. But Isabella didn't answer. She couldn't. Her lips moved, but no words came. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. And now the truth stood there in flesh and blood, undeniable, unavoidable. Robert finally spoke, his voice steady, low, but strong enough to cut through the tension. "Isabella knows exactly who I am, and so do I." The room fell silent again, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone. Isabella's knees buckled slightly, her bouquet slipping in her hands. She opened her mouth, tried to summon the confidence she once wore, like armor. But she tried to scream, and no sound came out. The silence that followed Robert's words was heavier than stone. Every guest leaned forward, as if afraid to breathe, waiting for what would come next. Isabella stood frozen at the altar, her knuckles white around the wilted bouquet, her lips trembling. Robert's voice carried through the hall, not loud, not angry, but steady, unshakable. "My name is Robert Kane, and before Isabella ever set her sights on this wedding, before she changed her name, she was my wife."
Gasps erupted across the room. A woman near the front covered her mouth with both hands. Chairs creaked as guests turned to one another in disbelief. Daniel's face went pale. What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "That's impossible. She would have told me. Robert didn't flinch. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. With hands that barely shook, he opened it, pulling out documents yellowed at the edges. "This," he said, holding it up, "is our marriage license, signed in her hand, and these," he pulled out another set of papers, worn but intact, "are the court documents from the divorce she swore would never follow her. She left me with debts that weren't mine, crimes I didn't commit. I paid for everything while she walked away free." The crowd murmured louder now, disbelief mixing with outrage. Isabella staggered back a step, her eyes darting around the hall, searching for an escape. "It's not true," she finally shouted, her voice cracking, desperation spilling through every word. But her words rang hollow. The papers were in Robert's hand, the name written clear, undeniable, and the way her voice shook only betrayed her further. Daniel turned to her, his hands shaking. "Isabella, is it true?" She stammered, her face flushing, her eyes refusing to meet his. I didn't... It was a mistake. It's not what it looks like." Robert's gaze hardened. "It's exactly what it looks like. I lost everything because of you, and now you're about to do the same to him." He pointed toward Daniel, his voice trembling with the weight of all he had endured. The crowd erupted again, voices overlapping, anger and shock rippling through the hall. Some shook their heads in disgust, others whispered furiously, the illusion of Isabella's perfect image crumbling like shattered glass. I stood silent, watching. I didn't need to add anything. The truth was laying itself bare, piece by piece, and there was no covering it up now. Isabella's shoulders sagged, the weight of Robert's words pressing down. She looked cornered, desperate, her carefully built world collapsing in front of hundreds of witnesses. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, another voice spoke up from the crowd. The hall had already erupted into chaos when Robert laid down the proof. Whispers turned to gasps, gasps to outrage. But then, cutting through the noise, came another voice, sharp, clear, and certain. "I know her too." The room fell silent again. A man in the middle row stood slowly, his face pale but determined. He was older, dressed in a simple jacket, not the kind of guest who belonged to Isabella's curated circle. His hands trembled slightly as he pointed toward her. "She worked at my firm 5 years ago," he said. "Different name back then, too. She forged signatures, drained accounts, and when the blame came down, she vanished. I lost my company because of her." Another wave of shock tore through the guests. Gasps, curses, heads shaking in disbelief. Isabella's mask was gone now, stripped away completely, leaving only panic in her eyes. She dropped the bouquet, the flowers scattering across the polished floor like broken promises. "No," she stammered, her voice hoarse. "That's not true. It's not true." But her protests were drowned out by the rising chorus of disbelief and anger. Everywhere she turned, faces that once smiled at her now glared in contempt. She was surrounded, cornered not by walls, but by the truth that had finally caught up to her. Daniel stood frozen, his chest rising and falling as if he were struggling to breathe. He looked at Robert, then at the man from the crowd, then finally at Isabella. "Tell me it's not true. Please, tell me they're lying." Her silence was louder than any denial. "I saw the moment my son's heart broke, the moment the blindfold was ripped away. His shoulders sagged, his hands fell to his sides, and his eyes, once full of love for her, were now clouded with betrayal. He didn't need my words. He didn't need my warning. He saw her for what she really was. Isabella tried to step toward him, reaching out as tears streaked her face. "Daniel, I did it for us, for a future, But he stepped back, shaking his head. "No, you did it for yourself, and you almost made me believe you." The hall was buzzing again, but this time the eyes weren't on me. They weren't even on Robert. They were all on her, Isabella, exposed, undone, the architect of her own downfall. I stood quietly, not triumphant, not smug. This wasn't about revenge. I hadn't come to gloat or to ruin her day. I had come to save my son's future from the same fate that Robert had endured. As Daniel walked away from her, leaving her standing alone at the altar, I felt the weight lift from my chest. My silence had spoken louder than her lies ever could. I turned, ready to leave the hall, my role finished. And as I walked toward the door, I said the only words that mattered. I didn't come to ruin my son's wedding. I came to save his future.